Welcome back to the Creating Resilience video series. This is number 15 in the series. We are jumping up the collective well-being tree. We have completed all the information about the roots of the tree to help build safety and connection and trusting relationships with caregiver reflection and regulation, with attunement, with response, and routines and rituals. And in the body of the tree, we're going to be talking about really focusing on our own body and helping other people understand their own body and emotion. And we'll be talking about emotional identification, vocabulary, understanding what those different emotions are. We'll be talking about emotional regulation more, and we'll be talking about expression. A lot of the things that we'll be talking about are related to what we talked about in the roots, but there are also more ideas for you to help teach this to other people, especially children that you might be working with. We're going to begin with emotional identification. Our emotions are just part of who we are. Everybody has feelings, and our feelings really are our mind and our body's way of trying to react to what is happening around us and inside us. If you go back and you think about when I talked about buttons in caregiver reflection and regulation, we talked about how buttons can be internal or they can be external, and they create feelings because they send us into our back seat. Feelings are not a bad thing. We all need to understand and feel our feelings. In fact, a lot of things that have gone wrong with our physical body is because at a young age, we have been taught to not talk about our feelings and not think about our feelings. But in fact, what recent science is showing us is that understanding and being able to express our feelings actually physically makes us more healthy. We have less cancer. We have less diabetes. We have less heart disease if we actually understand and can regulate and express our emotions. So feelings are really, really very important. Most people think that we are just really rational beings who occasionally have emotions, that we simply live in our front seat almost all the time, and every now and then we have that thing back there called an emotion. But in reality, we are really emotionally driven beings who occasionally have thoughtful responses, who occasionally can go in the front seat. Almost all of our behavior is driven through some sort of need for connection or safety. Sometimes our behavior is to find some meaning. But I thought this was a really interesting quote that in reality, we really are emotional beings who occasionally have thoughtful response. We have to really understand our own emotions before we can begin to understand emotions in others. So that's important for us, but it's also important if you're working with a child, a family member, or you're in a school system or something like that, a daycare. We often are saying to young children or young adults, well, how do you think that made so and so feel? Well, if they don't understand their own emotion, they're going to have a really hard time understanding how somebody else would feel. So being able to look at your own reflection and thinking about where am I in my brain, where are my emotions, and understanding those truly, it's really going to help you and others understand emotions of other people. So adversity or trauma very definitely impacts emotional identification. When you have ongoing high stress, it really overwhelms that emotional management skill set, especially when we're children. That's why I have limited emotional management skill set. Because if you think of young children, I mean, the terrible twos, it's all about not understanding emotions and what to do with them. So sometimes what happens is we it gets really difficult to understand our own emotional states, and sometimes we even disconnect from our own emotional states. So if you can imagine somebody that experienced a lot of fear when they were younger, they might disconnect from other emotions because any emotion might lead them to fear. Okay. The other thing that happens if we've had a lot of ongoing high stress is we start to use unhealthy coping skills. Rather than understanding our emotions and our energy and learning how to regulate them, we might use some form of substance. We might even use food to regulate. We might do some unhealthy behavior to regulate. And we might begin to misread other people's emotional cues. This is really important to understand if you're working with somebody that had a lot of exposure to trauma or adversity when they were younger, because they might misread other people's cues. There was this really amazing experiment done with over 100 children. About half of them had documented, strong relationships, safe environment, and the other half had been removed from homes due to abuse and neglect. And they showed these slides to them individually. So start at the bottom row. That emotion, when you get to the far right, is anger. And what they would do is they would flash the picture on the left and then the next picture and the next picture as the face is slowly turning into an angry face. And they asked the children, tell us when you first can recognize what emotion this person is feeling. And what they found was that the child that had a lot of adversity in their background chose this picture, a fairly neutral picture if you look up and down all the pictures, fairly neutral. They identified that as anger way back there, where the average person might not for the next two slides, when the eyebrows really kind of start to connect down. That's when most of us would recognize that person might be feeling angry. But the other thing that children raised with a lot of stress and adversity did is they said that this emotion, which is sadness, and this emotion, which is fear, were also anger. So somebody that has been raised in a very chaotic household is going to be what we call hyper vigilant. They're going to be constantly looking, when is somebody trying or starting to get mad? And they start to pick it up earlier, and they might miscommunicate other emotions for being angry. It's just a really great research findings to understand, so that if you are working with someone that had a lot of adversity in their background, they might read your facial cues differently than somebody that had not. Here's our reflection for this video. What emotion do you think you feel most of the time? If you need to break this out into most of the time at work or most of the time at home, that's fine. But I want you to just actually reflect on what emotion do you think you feel most of the time. And then your action step is to pay attention to your emotions over the next few days and pause periodically to identify what you are feeling in that moment. Because we don't have the same emotion all day long. So start to identify when there's a shift in your emotions throughout the day. So that reflection in the action step will actually help you identify and understand emotions a little bit better. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope you continue with me. I'll see you next time.